Welcome back, everyone. I am your friend, Dr. James. Today, we are diving into one of the deepest and most debated topic in theology, the intersection of divine sovereignty and human responsibility, specifically how it connects to the foreknowledge of God. Before we jump in, I want to give a very special acknowledgement to Dr. Ken Wilson. Much of the lecture material, the historical insights, and the theological arguments we are going to walk through today are sourced directly from his work. We've been looking at foreknowledge, determinism, and indeterminism. Now, we're going to tackle the tension between God's power and our choices. We're going to look at this through 6 specific lenses: determinism versus indeterminism, hard versus soft determinism, complete versus partial determinism, unilateral versus relational views, justice versus love, and finally, we'll ask the hard question: is this theological tension a mystery or is it a mistake? Let's get into it. The core tension here is obvious. On one side, you have the view, often associated with Augustinian Calvinism, that any human choice in salvation threatens God's sovereignty. If humans can choose, they argue, then God isn't fully in control and the very attributes of God are at stake. But flip the coin. If God's sovereignty totally excludes human choice, then the attributes of humanity, our moral responsibility, our ability to love are at stake. Usually, this is presented as a binary choice: determinism versus indeterminism. Determinism says everything occurs by God's plan. Indeterminism says everything occurs by chance. Now, if you look closely at the roots of these ideas, that first option, total determinism, is essentially Stoicism. The second option, total indeterminism, is practically atheism. Well, I'm not a Stoic, and I'm certainly not an atheist. So, which one do I pick? Neither. This is a false disjunction. There is a third option, which we can call partial determinism. Anderson refers to this as cooperative determinism, and I think that's a helpful term. Partial determinism says that only some things occur by God's direct decree and plan. Other things, God doesn't necessarily dictate exactly what happens. Think about it this way. When I was a young Christian, I honestly used to pray about whether to use the green toothbrush or the blue toothbrush. I held this Stoic view that God desired exactly this, minute by minute. Eventually, I realized He probably doesn't care if I use the green or the blue one, as long as my teeth get brushed. This is the strength of the partial determinism view. It says God isn't the only efficient cause in the universe. Humans can be efficient causes too, and this is a massive philosophical move, because if humans can be an efficient cause, then humans can be the cause of evil. If you don't take this view, you are backed into a corner where you either have to blame God for evil or claim it's a mystery without a cause. Now let's break down hard determinism. This view, heavily influenced by pagan Stoicism, argues two things. One, God must cause everything in order to be sovereign. 2. God must receive everything He desires because He is omnipotent. But look at the consequences. If God causes everything, God causes evil. If God causes everything, then when a human sins, God is technically the one pulling the strings. Theologians like Jonathan Edwards tried to solve this by splitting hairs between efficient causes and instrumental causes. They'd say God is the efficient cause, the one deciding, and the human is the instrumental cause, the tool. But does that work? Imagine a murder trial. The murderer says, "Hey, don't blame me. I was just the instrument. The gun did it." That doesn't fly. You can't pass the buck from the efficient cause to the instrument. If God is the efficient cause behind everything, then God is causing sin. Palmer, in his work on the 5 points of Calvinism, explicitly states that foreordination means God decides all that happens: the moving of a finger, the beating of a heart, the laughter of a girl, the mistake of a typist, even sin. If you hold to that hard deterministic view, the inevitable conclusion, pointed out correctly by Geisler, is that God is immoral. That is not the Christian God. That is a Stoic deity. And frankly, the idea that God giving free choice diminishes His sovereignty is backward. The early church fathers used to say that A puny God has to manipulate and control a child's hand to win at chess. But a truly sovereign God, he can allow the other player total freedom of movement and still win the game. That is true power. Let's touch on that second tenet of hard determinism, that God must receive everything he desires. This is what's known as a philosophical McEachern error variant. I won't bore you with the dense philosophy, but it comes down to definitions. Omnipotence does not mean getting everything you want. Sovereignty does not mean micromanaging every detail. A king can be sovereign over his kingdom without dictating what every peasant eats for breakfast. But because the deterministic view insists God must get what he wants, they run into a wall with Scripture. John 3:16 says God loved the world. 1 Timothy 2:4 says God desires all persons to be saved. But obviously, not everyone is saved. To fix this, determinists have to invent the perfect will versus the permissive will. They have to redefine the world to mean only the elect. It requires theological gymnastics. Partial determinism is the cleaner, more biblical option. God plans and foreordains some pivotal events. Humans cause other events. Some things happen by chance, meaning they aren't foreordained. The result? God is not the cause of evil, humans are. God does not ordain or desire evil. God's sovereignty is intact. Human free will is real. Let's move to the nature of God's interaction. Is it unilateral or relational? Unilateral determinism is the view of the Stoics, Gnostics, Manichaeans, and Neoplatonists. And here is a shocking historical fact. Augustine of Hippo was the only Christian bishop in history to embrace all four of those systems. Other fathers like Ambrose might have leaned toward Neoplatonism, but Augustine drank from all those wells. In contrast, the earliest Christians believed in a relational God. They believed God determined things based on his relationship with people. He foreknew their choices and wove his plan around that relationship. This is the difference between a God who unilaterally crushes opposition and a God who relates, woos, and interacts. This brings us to the attributes of justice and love. If you take the deterministic view, God's predestination is all about magnifying his justice. But think about the house fire analogy. If I see a house burning with 5 people inside and I have the power to save all of them, but I only pick 2 and let the other 3 burn just to show my power, you would call me a monster. You wouldn't call me just. Yet, this view gives God a pass for doing exactly that. The Christian God is a God of love. Love invites. Love does not force. But wait, I can hear someone asking, what about Romans 9? What about the vessels of wrath? Let's look at Romans 9:22-23. It talks about vessels of wrath prepared for destruction and vessels of mercy prepared for glory. This is the go-to text for double predestination. But we have to look at the Greek and the context. Context, Romans 9-11 is about God keeping his promises to the nation of Israel. It's not about individual eternal salvation. It's about temporal privileges of nations. The Greek, this is crucial. In verse 23, when it speaks of vessels of mercy, the verb used is protatomasen. It's in the active voice. God actively prepared them. But in verse 22, regarding the vessels of wrath, the word is katartasmena. It is in the middle passive voice. This means God did not prepare the vessels of wrath for destruction. They prepared themselves, they fitted themselves for destruction through their own obstinacy. And that word, destruction, apoleian. In the New Testament, this typically refers to physical ruin or death, not eternal hellfire. So, a faithful reading of Romans 9 isn't that God creates people just to send them to hell to show off his wrath. It's that God, with much long-suffering, endured people who were preparing themselves for ruin, while he actively poured mercy on others. The determinist reading of this, famously articulated by Pink, claims God purposes not to give faith to some so that he can damn them. That, frankly, is a Stoic view, not a Christian one. Finally, we arrive at our last question. Is this deterministic view a mystery or a mistake? When Augustinian Calvinists get backed into a corner, when they can't explain how a good God reprobates innocent people to hell, they appeal to mystery. They call it the secret counsel of God. But Dr. Wilson points out that this mystery has a specific birthday, 412 AD. That is when Augustine invented this theology. Why? To explain infant baptism. He had to explain why the church baptized babies who had no personal sin. He concluded they carried the guilt of Adam, original sin. Therefore, if a baby died unbaptized, they went to hell. This forced Augustine into a Stoic corner. If a virgin rushes a prostitute's baby to the baptismal font, that baby is saved. If a Christian mother's baby dies before the priest arrives, that baby is damned. Augustine had to conclude that God micromanages these deaths. Since infants can't believe, God must unilaterally decide their fate. And since they can't have faith, faith must be a unilateral gift given only to the elect. All of this theology, limited atonement, unconditional election, it all stems from Augustine's error in 412 regarding infant baptism. So, is it a mystery? I would suggest, along with Dr. Wilson, that it is not. It is a mistake. We can resolve the tension between divine sovereignty and human responsibility without making God the author of evil. We do it by embracing a biblical view of sovereignty, a relational view of foreknowledge, and understanding that God is great enough to remain sovereign while granting us the dignity of genuine responsibility. That wraps up this session. Thanks for listening. If you like this video, please share and subscribe. God bless.